Okay, we're gonna begin. So, hello to our audience. Welcome to Rendering Research. My name is Jeff Cox, and along with Christian Ulrich Andersen, I am one of the facilitators of this event. Aside from our institutional affiliations, Digital Aesthetics Research Centre at Aarhus University and the Centre for the Study of the Networked Image at London South Bank University, we are collaborating with ERG, the School of Graphic Research in Brussels, and of course Transmediale, who we thank for today's hosting. We have a number of short presentations today, approximately 5 minutes each, and we will finish with some collective writing and discussion. To explain a little more, the presentations are works in progress as part of a larger workshop that began late in 2021 with the sharing of short texts online open to comments by others. This event, the one today, is a further part of this development of ideas that extends over the coming months with a workshop in Brussels and the making of 2 publications, one that we will make together in the print workshop at ERG and an extended version for our open access online journal APRJA, a peer-reviewed journal about the acronym stands for. In the workshop, we are interested in drawing together work in progress and feedback. So here and now, you are able to join us in that process, the rendering of research in public. In addition to the Transmediale Telegram group chat, we encourage collective note-taking on the presentations via an online collaborative writing pad. The address is shared on the Transmediale website, and if you don't have it already, hopefully someone will put it in a link in Telegram. I now hand to Christian, who will say a little bit more about the workshops and about the theme of rendering research. Christian.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Jeff. My name is Christian Ulrich Andersen, and I'm co-organizing and moderating this event along with Jeff. And before moving on, I just want to say a few words about this event and workshop and also its history. As Jeff mentioned, and you may know, DARK at Aarhus University and also CSNI at London South Bank University have collaborated for, I think, a decade with the Transmediale Festival and shifting institutional partners around exploring the festival theme as a research topic. And festival topics don't always lend themselves easily to research, as they seem to have served different purposes. But I'd like to mention a few reasons why we do this anyway. First of all, many of the people who do research into digital art and network culture, they come from within a network culture. And Transmediale has, in this sense, become or has always been a place for this type of researchers to meet. And in particular, for a younger emerging group of researchers, it can seem important to access a festival that by definition is curated to bring their agendas to and insights to the table. So, and secondly, the institution of research, that is mostly the university, can also be considered sort of a gated community. So we're also interested in how we can open up academia's traditional ways of producing and acknowledging knowledge, and in particular open it up to knowledge practices that come from other traditions, such as that of living digital culture. So we think this is important, not least in a situation where the university and the conditions of research and also of studying at a university institution is undergoing severe changes. So how can we reimagine processes of peer review, for instance, or how can we think of research as something much more liquid or hybrid than an article in a refereed journal? Finally, we're interested in building networks between people and institutions. So over the years, we have, and Jeff mentioned this before, made workshops with numerous institutions, from the University of Cambridge to Constante in Brussels, just to name what one might think of as two very different research institutions. And then this year, it's ERC in Brussels. But most importantly, the purpose of the workshop is to provide a space to do research together, to develop individual projects, and to bring new perspectives on art and digital culture to the fore, and to build new professional and also personal relations. So now a few words on the theme rendering research, which might seem like a very broad topic, but we are thinking of the processes that render or makes research. What gets to be a thing to be researched and shared as knowledge? How is it published or made public? How does research unfold in spaces between groups of people? What are the social and technical conditions and infrastructures for such processes? For instance, at this presentation, we are hosted by Transmediale. We are supported by a company called Surview. We're also using Zoom, and there's also a public chat on Telegram. And in realizing the danger of introducing too many channels, in addition to this, we have, as Jeff mentioned, also decided to use a pad for collaborative writing. And just to add to what Jeff said, this was a collective decision between the participants because they thought it would be useful to them in their research. So if you so wish, you can take part in the collective note-taking. And at the end of presentation, we also invite you to take part in a collective reflection on the theme of rendering research, as Jeff mentioned. And if somebody is kind to put the link to the pad in the Telegram channel, but if not, it's pad.varia with 6vs.org/rendering. And I'm mentioning this because it's hosted by Varia, a Rotterdam-based collective whose members maintain and facilitate infrastructures, collective infrastructures, such as, for instance, an Etherpad. Just to mention how the many infrastructure and the politics of infrastructures, that's also part of rendering research. If you have questions along the way, you are welcome to put them in the Telegram channel. The workshop might run until close to 5 o'clock, but hopefully we have time to bring them up towards the end. And with this, I'd like to pass the word on to the first presenter, which is Alex. And then the presentations will now run in a stream without moderation, a stream of 16 5-minute presentations. So please, Alex.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen first. First, thank you very much for including me as a participant in this research. I'm very happy to share current work in progress. I think our bias you will be able to find in the pad later or on the website. So suffice it to say, I'm a media artist and researcher, and the project I'm going to talk about is a postdoctoral project which follows from my dissertation on procedural films. So the title is Procedural Animism. I hope you can all see the image. And the question I'm wondering about is a methodological one. So in terms of rendering research and thinking about algorithmic cultures, there's often a question of imagining algorithmic others of different kind. And so for this project, I'm thinking about how to approach this platforms conjuring up different bots, different chatbots, different figurations of artificial intelligence, and what kind of distance these imaginations create to the idea of human, and how this distance in turn is used to redefine also, what we consider human. So I thought that for this question, the colonial idea of the distance between the human, the kind of Western universal man, and the otherness would be very helpful. Yeah, we are kind of familiar with this being human as praxis, wonderful work, which involves this idea of a rational subject of Western modernity, which maintains itself by creating the distance between itself and human others, by carving out their outlines as rational and backward, and also by overrepresenting the Western conception of man as a universal one. So if we think about this in terms of visual culture and rhetorics, then the corporate imaginaries of artificial intelligence, they really serve to conceal social fabrics, these ideas of different distances conjured between the human and the others. So we also know that algorithmic procedures which are involved in this centralizing processes, they conjure kind of a digital subject. As Oliver Grinova notes, this is digital subject is neither a human being nor its representation, but actually a distance between the two. And this distance is employed by various forms of power to distinguish, map, and capture not only subjectivities, but also non-humans and physical things that inhabit the world. So my attention here goes exactly to first the processes of how non-Western others are sometimes rendered robotic, metaphorically in terms of cliches of being hardworking, or also literally by platforms of gig economy and by being used as Sebastian Schmig notes, as human extensions, like Amazon Turk and other platforms. But also I'm thinking about this non-human algorithmic others, multiple different types of different agents, all of these series, Alexas and Tays, bots, virtual assistants, servile fembots, NPCs, AI-powered kind of bureaucratic services that help run the organization. And I'm interested how the process of conjuring these non-human algorithmic others then presents a scale of being humanized or non-humanized, personified or semi-personified. And my idea for procedural animism then is a kind of a refusal to reduce our relationship to these algorithmic others. Animism here I use in two types of meanings. One is a kind of set of symptoms of our contemporary condition, sort of marginalization of different kinds of otherness, alienation, alienated labor, the use of images to distract from these processes, but also as an individual practice. Animism as a practice of being in a medium or relating to entities in the environment, and how these relations are increasingly mediated by images. Procedural is also kind of a loaded term. I won't stop on it long for brevity's sake, but suffice it to say that procedural, I imagine, is something that is first automated and is able to roll out on its own. But also something that proceeds in something that is able to go on. So then thinking about this procedural type of animism, coexisting with images and others, might be productive in terms of conjuring different spirits of AIs. Yeah, and although I'm critiquing the corporate ideas of AIs, I'm also happy to believe that alternative imaginaries and figurations can be very productive. Here I included some links to the recent publications that deal with it. So then we come to this, I think, how do we actually enable that? How to be non-human as praxis? Feminist science and technology studies and cyberfeminism already embraced this kind of alienness and the ability to turn procedure back on its own. But when I'm thinking about this corporate others, these multiple T's and Alexas, sometimes I'm having trouble imagining something as an entity, yeah, or as a person of some kind, as a personhood. So my suggestion and my kind of methodological question for this is trying to start not from an entity, but actually first to describe a world, a kind of political formation that makes these agents possible first, and then proceed to carving the outlines of this non-human other so that we can see an alternative image. So while preparing for this, I try to do my best at carving out such outlines. And here's one example, very late night, of some aspects of precarious academic existence, which could define something like an imaginary AI, probably for an art project. So it would be interesting to know what you all hear about this. I would also particularly like to ask you to contribute what kind of algorithmic others do you know? And what are the kinds that exist in your networks? And if you could add it to the pad, that would be great. Thank you. I'll stop here. And I think, do we have a space for questions or do we continue straight on? So then I'll pass it on to the next one. Thank you.
Hello, Clareese, are you there? I can't not seeing you in the Zoom. Yeah.
Under the radar.
Mixtape.
Shuffle play.
This is a collaborative transatlantic meandering around our respective research fields, interjected with archival traces of our performances.
Alongside us are the guide and Sojina.
The guide is a survival praxis of how the Black identity performs in anticipation of being trapped in the gaze of being processed as other, the pedagogical deployment of research and critical theory from Black studies, post-colonial studies, and Black feminist studies.
Sojina is a multi-bodied, multi-locational drag queen who sings songs about love, lust, and loneliness in the digital age, alone and with others, performing on stages and ready-made platforms of Google, Hangout, Skype, Zoom, Instagram, and so on.
What follows is a trans-racial, temporal, geographical edit of our side-by-side evaluation of where we are or not.
We are calling this our mixtape shuffle play.
The guide's physical appearance shifts and seeks to disrupt the technology she is commanding.
I am a self-sculpted C-celeb waiting for my social media presence to take off.
This disruption happens when the non-reflective skin meets the 3D scanner and she is not seen. Illegibility, intelligibility is perverted into a problem.
In my spare time, I write songs about having my phone in my wallet, waiting to download, and that kind of thing.
She rewrites the technological apparatus she uses in her practice. The technology becomes a conduit for contemporary social abolitionist ideals through the exploration of unrefined reproduction.
Played out on different bodies, I appear in one place or many places at once.
She is rejecting the indoctrination of auto-instituting by scrambling her legibility, intentionally making herself incomplete.
Filters are fabulous.
My situation, I pose.
The guide.
I begin with my body.
Right here, right now, we, us and you are present.
I begin from my body sitting at this computer.
In the next moment and in the moment after, constant instances of the next.
This body at the computer is a pose I've been in for a long time.
Until the moments that stood side by side, like the foot soldiers in the preservation of the problematics of time.
It is a pose that is at least partially dictated by the device, as is the case with most tools. A phone, a hammer, a fork, a QR code. Each brings with it its own choreography.
Vanish.
Tools are directive.
So does the limitations of time and space that you occupy.
The body at the computer position is one that's been taken up by many bodies for many more uninterrupted hours since COVID took hold, whilst our public and much of our private facingness is restricted to screens that cut most of us off, but which require our bodies to be there, here, nevertheless.
The spectators are watching you, so just remember to breathe.
Beside me is my phone.
And how those limitations transition to the fact that perception is an embodied illusion.
Every day over the past week, up to the writing of this sentence, I picked it up on average of 80.57123857142857 times.
Look at the spectators and remember to breathe again.
I spent an average of 3.97142857142857 hours a day on my phone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Sorry, really pleased to be here with Kyveli. We were constantly treading on changing soil textures. Road asphalt was replaced by sandy compacted soils. Closer to the dunes, the soil became flaky and passed with low vegetation. Around us, dunes, bushes, and tall yellow feather grass sculpted the undulated lowlands. While journeying around Gravelines, we never actually saw the sea, but it was constantly reminding us of its proximity. Here, the sea has been geoengineered into the landscape. It manifests as fragmented bodies of water that are entangled within the industrial terrain through conduits, harbors, canals, pools. Its horizontal embodied presence relegated further away. Acknowledging this point foregrounds an interesting shift in the making. It departs from the landscape's granular quality, its sandy expanses, the dusty industrial installations, the fragile and volatile soils that are constantly moved from one end to another to build, shape, extend, and host the industrial infrastructures. The sense of journeying on thin and flaky grounds is immediate, but then it is balanced by the overwhelming presence of bodies of waters that are nearing and moving in. The becoming liquid of the landscape is perceptible. The marshlands and polders, originally shaped by wind and sea, have convened a shifting geology that during the 1950s was forcibly turned into an industrial wasteland. Soil was brought and displaced to accommodate land extensions on which to build the multiple successive layers of industrial installations. Stunt rappels, ochre dust, peeled nakedness, achy throat. The sky and the seas pervasive openness, bleached light, blonde marshlands, lost highways, accumulation of signs, signposts, industrial logos, the uncanny and reassuring presence of fishermen. An afternoon at the beach, the visible hard angle of a war bunker in the distance, entangled roads, networks, the potent loneliness, the matte sound of the crumbling sand under her feet, granular geographies.
What Agnès just described is a walk around the nuclear plant of Gravelines in the north of France. Gravelines ranks amongst the most powerful infrastructures in the world with a total of 6 reactors, quite a feat for the standard of the sector. It lies on reclaimed land, a polder patch of land outside the city of Dunkirk. Along with 2 other infrastructures that run on the coast of Belgium and the Netherlands, Gravelines shares the soil of a fragile polder landscape. All 3 locations are threatened by imminent water rise since the ground they stand on is seeping away. Global warming and sea rising levels threaten the 3 nuclear plants and require the continuous construction of dikes and elevated buffers. The temporalities at play are on the spectrum of the very short term, ranging somewhere between 5 to 15 years. These 6 reactors on a polder then call for reflection and immediate action about and in the present. Yet, since these 3 nuclear plants are run by 3 distinct sovereign and juridical systems, those of France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, they are managed differently. Taking this discrepancy between the geological and the political as a starting point, Agnès and I are currently investigating the techno-natural entanglements at play in the 3 locations. We posit that water rise in these marshes is a form of ecological expression that must be examined across epistemic positions, not only through the lens of technoscience, but also as an aesthetic object, culturally specific to the landscape it stands on. We are particularly compelled by the temporal urgency at play in the nuclear marsh as a site of negotiation of climate change, as it goes against something often discussed in the environmental humanities in general and nuclear studies in particular. A fixation with a future, especially a deep future, which is always deluded because it, more often than not, comes at the expense of the present. Departing from Gravelines, these 3 swampy sites highlight this imminent temporality and help us diagnose something crucial about the production of nuclear knowledge. The question for us thus becomes, how can we open up to alternative forms of knowledge that challenge hegemonic political and scientific discourses framing nuclear science and technology? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Yasmin Budia. I'm a researcher and a technologist focusing on AI, epistemology, and the absurd. I will talk about my research project, AI Justice Matrix, the futility of policy craft, which I'm doing as part of the Just AI Fellowship at the Ada Lovelace Institute, funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So fundamentally, this project refutes the notion that effective policymaking as it relates to AI ethics is at all possible. It's a critique of Eurocentric knowledge processes and the way they manifest as curated information flows passing through sanctioned knowledge keepers. I developed the platform that is intended as a tool to playfully undermine the validity of research practices that inform public policy. So it's a collection of themed nodes that, when clicked, expand to reveal content relating to the theme. Over here we see the ethics theme and white feminism theme. This is an ongoing process of inquiry that exists in the Commons, and it's shaped by contributors concerned with the relationship between technology and society. There's a collaboration agreement, and contributors get a small fee. And there is collective attribution, but it does not show who wrote what in order to give people, especially people associated with institutions, I guess more creative freedom to really critique and interrogate the industry that they're a part of. The outputs will be determined by the community that is forming. So far, there have been a handful of contributors, and it will live on for as long as it's sustainable. Okay, so I'm going to now attempt to just demo to you the thing itself in development. So I'm showing that in order to talk about surveillance, we need to acknowledge the way that power works, and we need to talk about white supremacy, and within that there's white feminism and all the ways in which it manifests. So as an example, how white feminism has a relationship with military interventions, and how a certain type of ethics is used as justification for intervention, and how the military complex ends up funding a lot of research that happens in academic institutions, for example. So I'm going to go back to sharing my presentation. Cool. As more content is added, themed clusters begin to form organically, and I intend to publish the clusters and also host interrogation sessions of the content using some experimental models I developed. And finally, I would like to open the invitation for collaboration to you all. If you are concerned with the themes of this project and want to participate, please feel free to get in touch. Okay, thanks very much.
Hi, we're One Research Collective, and what we are interested in doing is exploring the intellectual and affective relations and processes of being with each other as a collaborative research group. And because we recently graduated, it made us want to reflect on our academic experience, as well as researchers and how it affects knowledge production, how institutions and academia define value. We wrote the text Waste Pedagogy to explore what we see as a rupture of this process, and we played around with what might be left out or devalued by incorporating our rough drafts within the final piece. And in other words, we want to move from waste as a category that is designated by the academic institution through to how waste can be used to activate concepts, thoughts in our research process. And we will now share a screen to show our diagram as a work in process, to show the development of our thinking, and we invite you to think with waste with us.
So beginning from the scale of the institution to elaborating on the research question to the debris of the individual thought and body and its potential to be diffracted back into our collective research group, we attempted to search for the scales at which waste materializes, is produced, and finally is activated as a rehearsal. In the context of our research, we use the concept or the boundary object of waste to amplify the in-between space between thinking, feeling, and knowing. Waste designates the excessive, the useless, the non-valuable, and the non-fruit of labor. So in other words, waste is an institutional category that designates the irrational and the useless. And that could be silence, jealousy, an introversion, discomfort, or a bodily posture, and so on. However, we understand waste as the extra rational, what is valuable beyond use value, and that which has a potential to disrupt epistemological rules governing scholarly knowledge.
At what moment and by what means does institutional waste become a category that is internalized by the individual student or researcher?
Likewise, we understand attending to waste as attending to the multiplicity of relations in the world that make up our thinking and knowing possible. In other words, just as intellectual waste, or we may say our body-mind debris, are embedded somewhere in the material world, we wanted to examine the realities that are not constructed because of a humanities method demands that certain things be ignored. We're curious about how to disrupt forms of academic negligence.
Waste as a free association, letting yourself be guided by an image, a smell, a feeling, or word into another thought that is somewhat further away from that first encounter. How can we formulate problems that are situated? How can we inhabit the breach between what you think is academically expected and what your initial intuition is? How can feeling and sensing be retained as a model of knowing?
Attending to waste is about refusing a center and inhabiting peripheral spaces. In the periphery, individuality is lost. Thought is textured, always more than an intellectual, theoretical, an archive of experience, both past, present, and immediate. The texture of thought is a combination of conscious and unconscious affects, both bodily and intellectual, that are excluded for academic thought and writing.
How can the embodiedness of the process of research be retained?
So we wanted to elaborate a method or a pedagogy in which the material, affective, and emotional components of our research are not deleted, but instead are rehearsed. So rehearsal is both a space and a process that prompts to collectively learn to calibrate the useless and the extra-rational as that which flows between thinking, knowing, and feeling in order to activate questions and concepts. So what can waste do, and what worlds do we not contribute to materializing by caring for waste? But we're not proposing that all thoughts need to be kept. And instead, we're describing a method of attunement in weaving collective, intensifying thoughts, feelings, or affects to activate plural modes of thought and relation.
If we begin to practice thinking and knowing as inherently performative, how can we rehearse thinking and knowing collectively as a speculative and generative mode of knowing?
So in our provocation of rehearsal, the body-mind debris no longer originates solely from the individual, but they're rendered collective through a process of what we named composting. Rehearsing then becomes a space for engagements, for collective explorations and repetitions that can open to the unexpected. We feel that repetition has this capacity to amplify what is discarded, rendering our rehearsal as the thing itself. Thank you.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. My name is Laura Kuguzi, and I am part of Cassandra Collective, together with Chiara Di Leone and Alexandra. Our research collective investigates institutional practices in the field of climate governance. And it explores how climate change is not only constructed through discourse and rhetoric, but also produced through a protocol of actions, gestures, rituals, and choreographies that corporate and state institutions perform. And more recently, our research focused on entangled temporalities and the blurring of boundaries between the physical and digital spaces, and also the boundaries between speculation and reality. And also on possible strategies for shaping a future that is already here by acknowledging the recursive power of sensing technologies in ensuring the habitability of Earth.
So we're interested in addressing how not only technologies and tools are cyclically presented as the new and the new promise of a future that is perpetually delayed, but also the meta-narratives and the world-building strategies and imaginaries around how these technologies emerge, and the difficult task of mapping the more or less fragmented entities that are benefiting from knowledge extraction and infrastructural control over these technologies. Our research practice is concerned with interdisciplinarity, and hence we're very happy to be part of this workshop that is whose theme is really at the core of our research, as we have been investigating the multiple literacies and mapping the multiple literacies that are necessary for addressing the governance of complex systems through remote sensing, and in particular in relation to tech design, AI and machine learning, and exploring how knowledge can be recursive and actionable and beyond epistemic entrenchment. We are interested in interdisciplinarity as not as an afterthought, but as a building stone of an effective response to the climate problem and to systemic problem in general. And we argue that the most successful research methods will have to consider a wealth of disciplinary lenses, from climatology to prediction, and from narratology to cartography. In recent years, we have seen an increasing number of initiatives focused on raising awareness around science, around climate change through science, art, and media, and aimed at shifting perspective and shifting narratives. And what we found is that the audience is almost always exclusively conceived as the general public, or like younger generations to be educated. With little or no knowledge of these complex systems, and with a basic awareness of the institutions that perpetuate them. So the academic discourse on climate change seems to fail at reaching wider audiences, and we have been discussing what are the possible solutions to this gap. On top of all of these, besides academia, also there is the system of military consultancies and other financially and politically motivated actors that are conducting their own research on climate change and looking for ways to instrumentalize also this their knowledge of it for specific agendas. So this research conducted by a few doesn't reach wider audiences, but has an impact on wider audiences in reality. So it is time for addressing like the particular of what research in the field of climate change can be, what audiences can reach, and how the communication of research fits into its role design. So with our recent research and our recent writing, we have been questioning how also aesthetic practices are culturally positioned as if they are uniquely suited for dealing with imagination and experimental methodologies only, while climate science is and academic writing has a moral as a higher ground of our authority and credibility. So this assumption often goes implicitly hand in hand with the distrust in science as the domain of rigid, inherited modes of thinking and inquiry, so that science cannot be associated with profound epistemological reconsideration and is only useful as source material for artists and designers to take as ground zero and radically reimagine. The productive kind of speculation is relegated to the field of artistic production, while scientific inquiry becomes tainted by its value for corporate and R&D departments, the culture of Silicon Valley innovation, and therefore capital. So science has always been as fit for radical imagination and reimagination as well as philosophical paradigm shifts, as much as the art and design world. And yet, in the popular imagination, artistic practices are heroically responsible for imagining radical possibilities of the future, while science can barely keep up with making sense of the present. So we're interested also in the meta-narrative of access to knowledge and knowledge distribution. And at this time, we are experiencing a clash of different temporalities. There is the deep time and geological time that we are more and more aware of, also through access to remote sensing and satellite imagery and climate modeling, complex climate modeling, as well as historical time and experiential time, which is also complicated by digital technologies and the access of information that we have increasingly available. So all these times, all these different concepts of times are folding into one another and are harder to think as simultaneous. So if there is, how can we think about time in a way that takes all of these entanglements into account? For now, what we are interested in doing is we have been building a collection of references, literary, academic, artistic, and multimedia, which we called the Carrier Bag Syllabus, in clear inspiration from Ursula Le Guin. And we are trying to enact and put in practice this spirit of interdisciplinarity and going beyond epistemic entrenchment and building together a collection of references and disciplines and perspectives that can actually have an impact on constructing the future. So, yeah. Thank you. And hopefully we can contribute together to this collection.
Hi there, my name is Rachel Falconer and it's really great to be here. I've really enjoyed listening to all of the presentations to date and really looking forward to hopefully having some interesting discussions, and I can see there's already some great comments coming up on the typepad. So I'm a curator and researcher, and I'd like to present or kind of put out there a working prototype that I'm working on called Fish and Media, which is a new generative failure model for alternative modes and processes of publicly rendered research imaginaries. So in this speculative model of public research, imagined otherwise, I take as my departure point the sliding registers of public access engagement, which are beginning to circulate around current creative research outputs and dispersion as they respond to the knee-jerk pandemic crisis-induced strategies and the ushering in of new networked and online or distributed models of public engagement, which begin to transmute and contraflow to the traditionally static constructs and superstructures of solid-state audience engagement across cultural institutions. So through this modelling of a series of working prototypes, which are designed to probe and agitate existing modes of public research and cultural dispersion, my aim is really to start to generate a kind of collection of imaginaries and speculative circuitry of new modes and models of network behaviour, as witnessed and accessed through the optic of alternative curatorial strategies. So the intention behind this experimental provocation is to construct a porous framework for possible new modes of network behaviours enacted through distributed curating in the form of public research as practice, comprising performative cartography sessions embedded within the frameworks of feminist technoscience, fuzzy logic, and networked cybernetic archival objecthood, which seem like a strange kind of combination, but I'm kind of enjoying the kind of awkwardness of that. So this active and responsive structure of interrogation scrutinizes the research as the object or as a traditional solid state model and places it in direct dialogue with the fluid kind of pseudo-pedagogical association attached to the construct of the workshop, to throw into sharp relief the implicit instability and fallacy of autonomy imbued within traditional categorizations of research in order to challenge systems of myopic belief and upstream knowledge production by proposing the conditions for the emergence of different spaces for the rendering of research otherwise. So it's really the conditions that I'm looking at rather than any kind of fully formed models. So my proposition of Fission-Malia takes its title and cue from the function of the classic Fission-Mailed story event in the gaming environment. So the genesis of Fission-Malia lies in its historic function in gaming, when the story reaches its logical conclusion and the player appears to have been defeated or lost their goal-oriented objectives within the logic of the gameplay. So the familiar kind of game over music comes on and a spoonerized version of mission failed, Fission-Mailed, invades the screen. But the game is not in fact over at all. And this plot device is usually deployed to destabilize the game player's perception of their position within the gaming environment, and really triggers the question of if they can actually trust the system within which they were up until that point fully invested, and if they can continue to faithfully follow the construct, reality, and rules of the game, whatever they might be. So Fission-Malia is an active function of game strategy where the player has to appear to have failed in order to advance the plot and move on to the next level. So my strategy or motivation behind importing this modality and celebration of failure contained with the logic of Fission-Malia within the context of my provocation or working prototype is to directly introduce functions of failure as agitators and agents of modification or change to traditional research constructs. By designing the conditions whereby the act of generative failure can potentially stimulate a reevaluation of perspectives, and more importantly, intention, by performing or reenacting the negation of linear research models, I really want to open up new spaces for public research to inhabit. The critical association and application of the function of Fission-Malia as a mode of impeding sense-making, blocking sense-making within traditional modes of research production and distribution, in this instance, facilitates the possibility of a remodeling or reimagining of alternative modes of public research, whose end goal is not to defend their position or to feed into a particular theoretical canon, but instead to throw light on the possibility of creating a mutable, porous, and responsive research mode, which is in a constant state of iteration and active multiple perspective witnessing, sensing, and deconstruction. So this exploration and establishing shots, if you like, of the framework of this new model is designed to suggest the conditions for a discrete set of publicly engaged research sprints or a series of failing or dysfunctional prototypes, which I hope to introduce as the medium through which this new form of public research as active and generative failure can be forecast. Thank you.
When I came close and saw us rebuild Balaguan, I understand that our ancestors built the Balaguan the same way as we did. I understand my heart and my ancestors' heart are the same. What we feel now is how our ancestors feel in the past. Imings is a Kararibu sculptor. His creative practices embody his culture, relive and co-create with his ancestor spirits. In addition, Since Taiwan was under Japanese rule, the Balaguan House was being erected from the Katadugu community to prevent the gathering of indigenous men. The contemporary rebuild of Balaguan convent, the indigenous youth each brought their toolkit to remake the architecture. Yiming installed his ancestor spirit's pillar right in the middle of the house. Therefore, the creating of the artwork talks to both the ancestor spirits and the community, carrying both ritualistic and societal meanings. The Yiming's co-creation with the ancestor spirits are opening up our authorship imagination and also remanufacture our expectation of the audienceship. The artwork largely emphasized the making process as a way to connect with the community containing a ritualistic connections. However, Yiming's artwork has never been recorded in Taiwan's art education system. The rebuild event was found in dusty tape in Katadugu Library. As the art world and the according education system was primarily fed upon the Euro-American centric perspective and supported by the capitalist economic system, we have comparatively less knowledge on how art represents culturally and economically in most of the colonized worlds. As scholar Walter Mialolo and Bonaventura de Sousa has mentioned, the colonial power continues to deconstruct existing knowledge, leading to epistemological injustice or even further a non-stopping epistemicide. Therefore, many indigenous art practice continues to negotiate with the current cultural production system that includes the private ownership idea in copyright laws or relationship with the museum audiences, art markets, and tourism industry. Some of them further mystify or ritualize their work as it challenges knowledge building's disenchanting yet discriminative logic. Many decentralized civic tech or free and open source communities also has joint authorship ruling style, and its anarchist political qualities had shone light for indigenous who seek to decolonize. For the two different communities, the members are both following community practice to contribute collectively. Secondly, many of its projects are long-term and open-ended. Generally, individuals assert relatively low levels of authorial control. Fourth, the identifiability of individual authors does not always matter. Fifth, the structure of the collaboration is generally open to newcomer. In all, both community shows potential model on how to be independent from a colonial government force. Many transactional art projects in Taiwan had worked and grow with a free and open source community, adopt Creative Commons protocols and decentralizing cooperation styles, as to create a social economical utopian. This includes artists Zhenshuli's Garlic and Rich Air, Li Zutong's Positive Coin, Winnie Sun's work for economy, and many others' work too. In this presentation, I take contemporary Taiwan as the starting point. Many artists on and around the island had made works revealing how people survive and refuse the colonial prodigy. Dutch, Spain, and many other colonizing forces have colonized the island, and now it serves between the China and US superpowers with Austronesian people living on it. Its long and layered history of colonization is the epitome of the international political wrestles, which resembles many other colonized countries around the globe, as we have long settled on the Euro-American centric elite perspective. If we could adjust our frame of references and put the marginalized perspective right at the middle of our view, a brand new ways of seeing art may unfold in front of our eyes. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me today. My name is Hanna Grześkiewicz, and I have called my project Looping Arts, Research, and the Streets. The project comes from an intersection of academic investigation and activist practice, with a particular focus on the role of the artist, activist, and of archives within social movements. The research is happening against a backdrop of digitized, mediatized politics and a fascistization of politics globally, looking to address an urgent need for dynamic renderings and more structured looping of research, arts, archiving, and the streets in the fight for better futures. The first impetus for this work came at the moment when the de facto abortion ban in Poland was made official, which was in January 2021. Despite the months of protesting, hundreds of different actions, hundreds of thousands of people in the streets, many international solidarity protests, and a population overwhelmingly supportive of the movement, the ban still went through. I was organizing protests and actions here in Berlin as well, so I'm based, in solidarity and connection with what was going on across the border. We would now and then, as a collective, try to find a moment to breathe and ask the questions, is what we are doing effective? Is what we're doing right now the right strategy? What are we demanding? What is our main narrative? There was rarely enough time to sit down, to take a step back, and to really discuss while we're in the eye of the storm. Since the de facto ban has been implemented, we know of at least 3 women who have died as a result of it, the latest just 2 days ago. Could we have stopped it from going through by using different methods and strategies while the movement had the masses engaged and on the streets? What can and should we do when we are in the quiet period, when people are not taken to the streets daily? I don't know the answers, but research and forms of rendering that are more immediate and that happen within, for, and about social movements could maybe be part of finding an answer. In my project so far, I have looked at some political, ideological shifts that happened during these 3 months. First, through the language used during the demonstrations, I looked at the use of swear words alongside words like revolution and care, and the prevalent concept of the strike. I have looked at shifting narratives such as their relationship towards the police, from celebrating them, joining the protest at the beginning, to adopting the slogan, "Take off your uniform, apologize to your mother." All of this signaled a shift towards a more radical politics. I have looked at the use of the arts and the range of artistic interventions and have begun looking at their purpose and their role, whether it was the repurposing of Eric Pryde's Call on Me as a protest song, or the rewriting of Bella Ciao, or techno blockades, or the visual reclaiming of public space. All of them served a different purpose. I have also looked at different forms of archives. This included living grassroots forms like the Public Protest Archive, the online depository and strike newspapers, or the group of activists who mounted a forest of banners, a temporary exhibition outside of the Warsaw Museum of Contemporary Art after one of the major protests. I also looked at institutional attempts, such as the open call from the Gdańsk Museum for souvenirs from the protests, or the currently ongoing exhibition at the Warsaw Museum of Contemporary Art. The reason this is about looping research, the arts, and the streets is that research, somehow done in real time, somehow rendered, could be a place where we can start looking for answers to the question of what effective political strategies and the desired long-term political goals could be, investigated from within the collective emotions, events, aims as emerging during a protest wave. The specific questions I am currently asking are, is the role of the artist during a protest wave just to disseminate awareness or knowledge and to inspire? Or can artistic research be a form of knowledge development and therefore a rendering of the research to further political goals and develop political strategies? What is the role of the archive? The Public Protest Archive looped their work directly back into the streets to control the narrative and alter or maintain the aesthetics of the strong visual identity of the movement. But what do the institutional archives achieve? What is their role? This project is still in an exploratory stage. The aim of this research is to loop it back into spaces of political organizing, researching archiving methodologies, artistic interventions, and attaching research and researchers to social movements are all aspects of developing strategies for fighting for better futures. Both artists and activists task themselves with this imaging and imagining. Knowledge making is one necessary step, and finding answers to the question of rendering is another. It is a research that needs to be both long-term and immediate, that is as necessary during outbursts of protest as in the in-between phases of simmering. It is a task that I find not only interesting, but I find existential as we search and continue to search for answers to how to change the fascistic course that the Polish, as well as many other global political elites, are currently on. Thank you. That's it from me.
Hi, I'm Ruben. I'm a media artist and a PhD candidate as part of the Security Vision research project in which we look at the politics and ethics of computer vision and the use of computer vision in practices of security. And this research project started with the question to map what security vision could look like. So we were thinking of like, how do we draw a map of practices of security vision? And the first thing that we had in mind was to, draw a sort of geographical map. Let's imagine with a bit, a map that we're familiar with, a map that we can relate with. And so we started collecting data about different companies, and my computer is acting up a little bit, so I have to go a bit slower. Companies. And of deployments. And the idea was, okay, we collect this in a database and more entries, and we annotate this with some coordinates, just as we're all familiar with. And as a proper tech demo, the interface is failing, but that's great actually. And so we were collecting this data and then thinking like, okay, we have these points and then we project them. We have our data here, our little data set, and we run them by some data projection, some algorithm that changes our coordinates. And places them on the map. But we were a bit disconcerted with what appeared to us, because as we learned from Haraway, is that a map easily sort of gives the sense of this bird's eye view. But this bird's eye view of the map gives this godlike perspective, and as if there is only one way to look at the data that we collected, and if there's only one way to think about what is security vision or what is computer vision in security applications. And it's also a second thing that we thought of is that when we think of projection as being a kind of algorithm, then Adrian Mackenzie tells us like that there's always a particular kind of unfairness to this projection. On the one hand, because it can be unrepresentative of the population or the thing that we're collecting, and on the other hand, because for example, it's unrepresentative because let's think of the labeled faces in the wild data set, for example, where there's all kinds of people collected, but then it's people that appear on the television. So that's not really representative of a general population. So there is a particular kind of unfairness there. On the other hand, it can be unfair if it is actually representative of a particular population. I think of, for example, there was a moment in which there was a sort of outrage on when you search Google for CEO images, that you only got males or primarily got male images. And probably a lot of CEOs are male, but that doesn't mean that is, a sort of fair representation of what we want the algorithm to show when we search. So we were thinking, how can we map security vision without without projection. How can we get rid of this? And a projection like that would leave room for different kind of imaginaries of the people that we interview and speak with. It would leave room for different kind of sort of ontological politics. So this is why we came up with the interface that you see here is a drawing interface, just a clean surface with which we can draw diagrams. So the idea is to do interviews with participants and draw diagrams with them. And then we can annotate these diagrams, if it's loading. So the idea is to have a kind of mapping that goes away of the projection, but actually leaves room to different kinds of thinking about the object of research. And what we're left with, if we are the diagrams as I just drew, and like an interview, we want to then sort of annotate them, so we can think of different kind of annotations. And here it is just a random, an arbitrary set of words that we use so far to test with. And the idea is to then sort of create annotations based on these diagrams that are still time-based and still very much attached to the words as they are spoken, because the diagramming is not a practice of producing an outcome, but actually it's a process of thinking and coming about. And by cutting out these various elements will allow us to also sort of interject and combine the various diagrams of the various participants. To also combine and come to new ideas and new ways of looking at what computer vision, how it is imagined. And this is the work in progress, and the interviews still need to appear. So we still have to try this out, and this is also part of the workshop that will come as part of the rendering research. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hi again to all the workshop participants, and hello also to whoever is with us in the audience today. Thanks for being here. My name is Miriam Matheson, and I will be presenting on behalf of myself and also Elly Steele, my collaborator. Together, we recently started the Resource Project. This is a project that takes its concrete expression in the form of a browser extension. Still in development, still a steady and slow work in progress. But it is a browser extension that seeks to render information about working conditions across the supply chain of a given company that a user is interacting with on the web. But the browser extension is also part of a larger umbrella project that considers the various ways to render a supply chain, visually or otherwise, as well as the politics thereof. Our work was born out of a series of informal conversations on this topic some years ago, which has gradually evolved into what is now some kind of project form. And through a mentorship program run by the Wikimedia Foundation last summer, we were able to develop these ideas a bit further, though we left with at least as many questions as we found answers. And so what I would like to briefly share today is a reflection on how we might think of the possibilities and limitations of designing this kind of tool in light of the existing supply chain information landscape. And the first thing concerns open knowledge in an age of open data, because over the past 15 years, we've seen an emergence of
a transparency paradigm in supply chain capitalism, where companies are urged to be more and more transparent about their corporate practices transnationally. And this has led to a whole gamut of CSR reports, ESG standards, and other corporate sustainability commitments that are also converging with a more general moment of information overload on the web. So while we drown in all this information, the need for more of it is made a constant talking point in the name of progress, and corporate actors show an increasing willingness to self-disclose it. But rather than rupture, what marks a continuity in this shift from secrecy to transparency is the corporate setting of terms of both the nature and pace of the information being released. This also means that indices and rankings designed for accountability purposes rely to a great extent on reconstructions of information that has been provided by corporations in the first place. And so in this sense, the move towards openness far from eradicates the practice of secrecy. On the contrary, this voluntarily released information makes the critical appraisal and countering of it all the more urgent. And so far in our research on the design and development possibilities of a digital tool that could render information about labor conditions across corporate supply chains, what we found is that from a technical standpoint, the information that is always most amenable to use by a digital tool such as the browser extension, in terms of data structure and scalability, is typically always data that has a CSR corporate provenance at its core. At the same time, we've also found that there's an abundance of online activity and presence of workers' movements and unions across the world who increasingly use the digital sphere as a form of mobilization and organization. And so what we're currently asking ourselves and looking at is, given this distinction between knowledge that is voluntarily given and knowledge that must to some degree be opened by force, how can and should the open knowledge communities and movements on the web, with their history of online activism, critically respond to this moment of willing corporate openness? And also, how can the development of digital tools be designed so as to decrease reliance on standardized and quantified information, and instead make space for the partial, the temporary, the incomplete, the patchy, and the heterogeneous? And in this vein, we believe that in rendering supply chain research, we must abandon the logics of totality and enumeration in favor of developing heuristic techniques that shift the question from what is a supply chain or what is the supply chain of X to how can we learn how to learn about supply chains? And can this lead to think space and distance otherwise, with new relations of responsibility, reciprocity, and solidarity arising from it? Thank you.
So hello all, my name is Malthe and I'll be talking about mimics in the waiting room. I hope you can see my screen. So last year, I, together with about 50 other people, including 20 researchers, participated in what's called Civilisationens Venterum, or in English, Civilization's Waiting Room, which is a live-action role play that was focusing on machine vision, surveillance, and ethics, organized by the Machine Vision in Everyday Life research project. And I'm not part of this project, but I was there for the thing. So Civilisationens Venterum takes place in a speculative future, post-apocalyptic world riddled with environmental and military damage, and where one of the few remaining habitable places is the city-state Civilisation, or in English, the civilization. So in Civilisation, an advanced AI system called Intelligensen, or the intelligence, is responsible for all major decisions, including continuously calibrating the personal scores of all the citizens, as you can see somewhere in this image. So the plot of Civilisationens Venterum takes place in the waiting room for civilization, or for civilization, where outsiders are evaluated and possibly granted entry into this place. And in one of these images, the top right, I think, you can see that some of the participants in the roleplay were reporting on each other continuously using handheld devices in a specifically designed platform. And these ways of reporting on each other would then affect the scores in the game. So I role-played as Trinidad, who was a high-ranking observer working directly for the intelligence, for Intelligensen, And my eyesight was in the narrative directly connected to the system, so that everything I saw was live streamed directly to the AI, or at least that was the story, right? And you can see me in one of these images as well in the process of co-thinking with the intelligence, and where my neurological buildup would be kind of connected to this AI, and then I could speak on its behalf, and it could also affect my way of thinking. So my character's live feeding eyes positioned me in between performing a human and a machine, and this position afforded deep aesthetic engagements with the mimetic fluidity between my character and intelligence. So I say mimetic fluidity, and what I want to propose is that such a position situated in a mimetic middle between a person and an AI has a certain epistemic potential. In an essay fragment from the 30s, a long time ago, on mimesis perception and language, Malthe Benjamin asserts that, and this is a quote, that the very greatest capacity for the generation of similarities belongs to human beings. Indeed, this is Benjamin continuing, there may be no single one of human beings' higher functions that is not co-determined by this mimetic faculty. So Benjamin is positioning mimesis, which is conceptualized as both the perception of and the generation of similarities, at the center not only of aesthetics, but of human experience and existence as such. However, it seems that today we have a situation where machine learning systems are rivaling or perhaps conceptually questioning Benjamin's claim. As Adrian Mackenzie have argued, the premise of machine learning is that, and this is a quote again, confronted with superabundant but fragmented data, it can recognize and render patterns that people cannot. So see similarities that people simply cannot see. In this way, machine learning systems are mimicking the mimetic faculty. They are mimicking the very capacity to mimic or to perceive and generate similarities that Benjamin located in people. That being said, of course, a lot of systems are designed to mimic humans and to perform operations that are measured in comparison to a standardized and, of course, exclusive and reductive human measurement. It's important to note that it is in no way necessary for these systems to mimic humans. They can mimic anything. And as we know, they mimic often bias and bigotry. And what they mimic comes in the form of data sets. So you could take the formulation a little bit further, say they mimic data. That's what they do. So we need to take mimesis seriously as a machine learning concept in order to reckon with this mimetic condition upon which these systems function. I stipulate that we can harness the mimetic faculty to inquire into the mimetic nature of machine learning systems, thus refusing numerical, extractive, and at worst oppressive paradigms in favor of rendering embodied, careful, and aesthetic ways of knowing about our automatized mimetic counterparts. So allow me to rephrase this into a couple of questions. Can a live action role play sustain mimetic encounters with computational systems? Further, can such a role play sustain or be operated as a design technique in the context of machine learning design, illuminating avenues of designing these systems from the vantage point of mimesis? And lastly, what are the limits and limitations of this kind of mimetic inquiry? And these are the questions that I am currently in the process of rendering. Thanks for listening.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks to the rendering research colleagues and also to Transmediale team for giving me this space. My name is Vítor Blanco-Fernández, and I am a predoctoral fellow at Universitat Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona. And I am also an in the making curator right now. Almost my energy is devoted to queer and transfeminist contemporary artists using 3D virtual realities, immersive or VFX aesthetics, which is as well the topic of my ongoing PhD dissertation. As we don't have a lot of time today, I will directly go to the point. That is none other than a lot of unresolved questions. It is said that 3D rendering is a misogynist, white, and straight place, but I happily disagree. Of course, there is misogyny, white supremacy, and compulsory heterosexuality in 3D, as everywhere, but it is also true that an increasing number of queer and or non-white artists are taking these formats and aesthetics in fantastic ways. So let's go for some examples. Keken's We Are at the End of Something imagines a post-COVID future by engaging with Ursula K. Le Guin's theory of the career back. Jacoby Satterwhite's Having No Head is a sanctuary, a safe space for Black women after the killing of Breonna Taylor by the US police officers. Daniel Brathwaite's Shirley creates inverted video games. While playing them, Black trans users find peace and relief, and non-trans and non-Black users experience difficulty and stress. And Theo Trifantilidis' Pastoral stars a trans female ogre whose only purpose is to roam around during a peaceful sunset. But what I want to get today is that these art pieces aren't queer just thematically. There is something deeper in their format and in their aesthetics that can be understood inherently as queer as well. 3D volumes, immersive experiences, virtual spaces, at least nowadays, are sites of queerness. When immersed in them, we experience disorientation, we experience failure, strange embodiments, exploration and testing, and probably we enter with an avatar quite different to away from the keyboard itself. These are the thoughts that are occupying my current research and indeed my PhD project. The worst part about this is that they will have to be rendered in the traditional written format of a dissertation. Express this kind of disorientation, of failure, of queer embodiments or exploration through words, through written words, it's hard and it's evidently out of my reach. And perhaps it's also, why not, senseless regarding my political concerns. That's why I'm here, exploring how to render them differently, or more accurately, how to render them queerly. I am quite sure that the render I'm searching for will take place virtually in an immersive digital space. But that's only the first step of a really hard path. How we can create an online virtual space rendered as queer, how to express queerness in 3D virtuality, and how to put inside this space the reflections, ideas, conversations, and experiences that form my research. Let's try to find solutions by asking more questions. How to create a virtual space based on queer phenomenology, one that includes not only disorientation, but lack of strict paths, borders, or doors, away from realism, and based on queer world making. How to share the results of the research in a way that they can be suggested, roamed, felt, rather than read or listened to. And of course, how to create the rules of a queer virtual space whose main rule is that everything can be transformed, that everything is open to fluidity and change. And moreover, how to design and host it in a feminist, non-extractive green server. What are the open source softwares for 3D and virtual rendering? Which feminist host can host this? And if non-compromised feminist server can, and I need to use privatized and extractive software or servers, how can I repair the damage I am causing? The answers of all these questions are still to be found. So thank you so much for this opportunity to speak and to say them out loud here. If you have any comments, suggestions, insights, answer, they will be super, super, super grateful for me. Thank you so much.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks everyone for the presentations already, and thanks to the audience for being here. I am Castillo. I am an artist and an arts researcher from Castilla-La Mancha, currently based in Brussels, and I am leading a research project which is supported by the Scientific Research Fund of Belgium and supported by ERG Art School in Brussels. The project I'm leading is titled Experimental and Collaborative Artistic Research on Trans-Flag Bidike Assemblies and Harm Reaction. The project departs from the desire to gather in chosen mixity, intimately, and in self-management between Trans-Flag Bidike artists and activists to live and practice in the wake of the COVID epidemic outbreak, to oppose healthism using harm reduction political paradigms and connecting with our Trans-Flag Bidike lineage of community health. Within this project, we gather in assemblies, in I repeat, chosen mixity intimately and in self-management, and we decide upon our methodologies of rendering our research public. By doing so, we are declaring our identities, we are determining our relationship with scholarly and arts institutions and our governance. All this we're doing to live and practice as Transfagbidaik artists and activists in the wake of the COVID epidemic outbreak. As a note towards, which explains or illustrates this desire to organize this research intimately, I want to mention that a quote from Maria Galindo. In December, I attended a presentation of Maria Galindo in El Eco, Self-Managed and Libertarian Social and Cultural Space in Madrid. I was brought there by a member of Movimiento Marica Madrid, which is a collective. When I'm there, Maria is performing in the middle of a very crowded room, using every bit of her voice to transit back and forth from low to high-pitched sounds. She starts her presentation by titling it in front of us, La lucha social tiene que ser un paraíso donde quedarse. What means social struggles must be a paradise where to stay. In this friction in between intimacy and the necessity of, or the request of the institutions for making our research public, we developed a methodology which serves to move from the intimate assemblies towards publicly produced projects. This we call now committees for rendering. The people in the assemblies of this research project can decide upon what public projects they want to develop after the assembly. Those are not a report of the assembly. Those don't unveil the knowledges that are privately shared in the assembly. Within the first assembly that we hosted in Greenmonster, in a village in Belgium, we agreed upon a commission for rendering of our project, which is the endeavor, which is accompanying the collective Athens Museum of Queer Arts, AMOQA, in the endeavor of opening a semi-permanent park in Athens that will host their activities and serve as a Transfagbidaik community health center. By this eccentric mode of rendering our research public, we're trying to interrogate what processes we choose to transmit Transfagbidaik knowledges, and therefore how we relate with the arts and research institutions we collaborate with. There are two members of the previously mentioned collective, AMOQA, the Athens Museum of Queer Art, who will now illustrate about how the process of this public rendering is going.
Hello all, I will give you a small presentation of AMOQA. The space was organized as a hybrid entity for the research and promotion of arts and studies on sexuality and gender. It hosted special nights, festivals of performance, screenings of documentaries and experimental queer films, technology workshops, lectures on gender topics, queer music gigs, and more. It was also a way to build an LGBTQI+ archive. Another goal was to create a safe space where queer feminist activist groups could meet, organize, and host their events. When the pandemic hit, AMOQA was already homeless for a year, making the difficult process of finding a new space even more challenging. This is how the idea of our project to becoming a park started coming into shape. The idea of finding an open space where all our activities would be resumed in a way that would be accessible to the public without reproducing exclusionary policies. We are also moved by the urge to create a green space within the city where queers could experiment with and learn from practices of self-sustainability and where community care would take a new radical direction. This new direction is still unclear. We don't really know what queer community healthcare looks like to us, but we know, especially after 2 years of living in a pandemic, the difference of having a space to meet can make in our lives. To be able to gather collectively as queer and trans fag dykes, to share our politics in a political setting, to share our creativity and our fantasies, to be able to address our needs, pains, desires, and having a starting point from which to take action.
Hello. So to continue, by renaming ourselves from a museum into a park, we start to give shape to our new desires and respond to the new urgencies that appear. From the start, the problematic that AMOQA wished to respond upon was the lack of a space, not because there was no space, but because the space is taken from us metaphorically, literally, and historically. The mere existence and maintenance of a safe space for us, being a queer park or a queer museum, is a gesture of restorative justice. And this is our research topic, restorative towards queer lives and towards the environment that we are part of. So one can tell that the constant research topic of AMOQA is the invention of survival tools that correspond to our actual ever-demanding, threatening realities. Not only defending ourselves against homotransphobia, sexism, consumerism, and neoliberalism, but also defending our right to an accessible city after 2 years of traumatic lockdowns, forced social distancing, and sanitary passports. The main topic of this research, being survival, means at one hand it's time for queer politics to get connected with other communities in Greece and abroad that connect transfeminist theory with struggles for the defense of our environment against its continual exploitation, privatization, fragmentation, and geopolitical abuse. I don't know if we are out of time, but I can continue a bit. On the other hand, AMOQA has been one of the very few, if not the only one, collective DIY space in Athens that has tried to convert its museum premises and events accessible, building accessible toilets, offering sign language interpretation, translations in other languages, and offering transnational and transgenerational events. What we experienced through the pandemic has been that the problems of accessibility had broadened, the social sphere has shrinked. More vulnerabilities came to surface, and a forced outing of people's privacy and health issues has taken place. So from a queer museum that collects storytellers and produces community knowledge while produces space for community life, our survival modes nowadays brings us upon the urgency of occupying an exterior public space in the format of a park, for being visible against any historical erasures, making a shift in discovering more earthly, queer-friendly ways of coexistence. That's all.
Hi, I'm Shan Yu, a Hong Kong-born, Helsinki-based visual artist and researcher. I'm a doctoral candidate in photography at Aalto University, researching algorithmic image systems such as computer vision, 3D computer graphics, and remote sensing. It doesn't bear repeating how ubiquitous photography and planetary computation transform our visual culture. From social media, extraterrestrial imaging, to computer vision, we are now embedded in a network made up of human actors, computer agents, and images, each affecting the life and death of each other. So HyperImage is a research project I started that talks about images not as static representation of reality, but interfaces, or buttons with a picture, as Benjamin Bratton calls it. HyperImage does not limit itself to the artificial line dividing fine art and vernacular photography, analog and digital, 2D and 3D media. Instead, my account focuses on the network and scale to address new modes of post-human visualities beyond photography. In other words, in my research, I render my research to reveal the relationship between images and the network in which they are embedded in. And I look at scalar frames, as Zachary Horton puts it, the scalar frame that makes visual mediation possible. So how to render my research that is reflective of the transdisciplinary, network, and scalar nature of new optical media is important to me. One way I render algorithmic image system is through artistic research, an emerging research methodology that brings forth new insights through creative processes. It is an alternative mode of research to the traditionally applied qualitative and quantitative research, and I titled mine Ground Truth Trilogy. Each chapter is explored remote sensing, 3D computer graphics, and computer vision respectively. The remote sensing chapter is called How to Resurrect a Tree, and it is a story about seeing something that is not there. In the project, I collaborate with remote sensing researchers to understand the mission to overcome the resolution limit of forest satellite imagery. I follow the researchers on their field trips to collect ground truth data in the forest, and I interviewed them to understand how they use this data to build models. I went through photo archives to look back at the history of landscape photogrammetry and forest reflectance modeling. In short, through a little bit of media archaeology and visual anthropology, I uncover the under-discussed role of ground truth data in algorithmic image systems. I render my findings in the form of 3D artworks, photography, exhibitions, and artist books. This artist book called Ground Truth, with the same title of the project, it's published last autumn with Erslev Connection. And the book, with these artworks, reviews new modes of computer-aided seeing while reflecting on the romantic tradition of landscape photography. Another way I propose to render my research is Hyperimage Index. Hyperimage Index is an ongoing project to catalog discourse on algorithmic images beyond academic journals and white cube spaces. My wish for the project is to render research back into an accessible, open, and collaborative process. This project is inspired by Mindy Su's Cyberfeminist Index. Hyperimage Index is an online collaborative annotated index for photography theory in the algorithmic age. On the one hand, the index assembles new thinking in visual culture and excavates overlooked theories from the past to highlight a post-human philosophy of image culture. On the other hand, the index archives conversations with experts from different fields to expand the notion of photography and make interdisciplinary connections. So one of the things I'm working on is this data set of new concepts and new and old concepts from literature that is relevant to the notion of network and scale, which is helpful, which in my opinion, it's helpful to render and understand algorithmic image systems. The index invites experts and thinkers to create new entries, define concepts, and make reading suggestions so that it will become a dynamic and collaborative platform for cross-disciplinary knowledge making. It will support theoretical thinking and pedagogy for the emerging media scholarship on algorithmic images. So I envision the index to organize theoretical thinking in a way that reflects the network nature of algorithmic image systems. And I do that by embracing a database aesthetic to create connections across disciplines and allow users to explore thinking beyond the usual constellation of ideas. So to end, I'm leaving my contact here, and you're very welcome to contact me if you want to collaborate and develop the platform further. Thank you very much.
Okay, hello. Thank you for joining and for staying with us all this time. My name is Paul Bailey, and I understand I'm the final presenter. I'm interested in how and where research renders and appears, elsewhere and otherwise, how it fails and also attempts. Like many others who have presented this afternoon, I am curious and often bewildered by the restrictions we encounter within academic publishing practices. I wonder about the impact of institutional protocols on the potential of a discipline. The papers, the journals, the paywalls, etc., as well as that, the ecologies and economies that maintain them. I specifically think on these concerns from a practice of graphic design that is driven by an investigative, critical, and increasingly non-normative approach. graphic design is a practice continuously negotiating a disciplinary struggle with the requirements and frameworks of institutional research metrics and infrastructures. This review from the Research Excellence Framework in the UK, where I'm currently based, tells us that graphic design research is not playing the institutional game very well. It suggests that the discipline is undeveloped and therefore less legible when read in reference to other disciplines through the institutional research metrics. According to this REF review, it looks like this is a discipline that is failing. This is an ironic state of affairs considering the social, aesthetic and technological capabilities of graphic design, a discipline comprised of people and practices that are specialized in making knowledge public. It is also a limited view. Sue Walker tells us graphic design research is thriving if you know where to look for it. Think beyond the institution by way of independent, progressive practices such as those that you can see playing out on screen. That said, what does it mean when the research and knowledge produced by your field is not in full view of the institutional apparatus? In reading The Queer Art of Failure, Halberstam led me towards Foucault's articulation of subjugated knowledges. Forms of knowledge that have not simply been lost or forgotten, they've been disqualified, rendered nonsensical or non-conceptual or insufficiently elaborated. Foucault calls them naive knowledges, hierarchically inferior knowledges, knowledges that are below the required level of erudition or scientificity. This is a place where the practices of illegibility and other antidisciplinary approaches are coaxed out and explored as a counter to the disciplinary codes regulating practices. If we are to accept the REF panel review as a metric for the state of graphic design research, might a discipline like graphic design then qualify as a site rich with subjugated knowledges? And if so, what forms might it employ when making undisciplined graphic design research public? These questions and others like them are seeping into my current practice-based PhD research. I'm attempting to investigate and develop the visual essay as a critical, pedagogical, and reflexive instrument, as a means to incite critical sensibilities, mentalities, and disciplinary imaginaries for and from graphic design. The research departs from perceived tension between the instrument, the visual essay, and the discipline, graphic design, and I'll quickly explain how. We have observed the essay move across modalities and sites throughout time. The literary essay, the visual essay, the audiovisual essay, the film essay, the theatre essay, and onwards. And with each transgression opening up new opportunities to attempt, to formulate argumentation, to speculate, and to wander. The essay as a form does not set out to offer resolute answers. The essay seeks to open inquiry, to problematize, and in some cases to make strange, to disrupt the familiar by loosening habitual connections. When we consider these characteristics against the perceived traditional remit and intentions of graphic design, think about terms such as to simplify, to offer a resolved solution to a given problem, to package an idea neatly and succinctly for a given market, it suggests the form of the visual essay in graphic design practice is in direct opposition with the field. It also proposes that the use of the visual essay in graphic design practice proposes and supports a leaning towards an expanded view of and on the field. For instance, a move towards a critical practice through graphic design, where the visual essay can be instrumental in mobilizing critical discourse, devising alternative new visual worlds, and furthering imaginaries for what qualifies as disciplinary knowledge. I'll conclude here with me thinking further on the potentials, relations between what might be seen as an illegible discipline and the gesture of attempts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks to all the presenters and the audience for your ongoing attention. We'd now like to invite everyone to join us for some collective writing, a collaborative rendering of research, if you like. We're curious what happens, where this takes us. We'll spend at least 5 minutes doing this, and we're really curious what happens when we break out of this broadcast model for a moment. So if you join us in the pad, we will see what happens.
Christian, we can't hear you.
I hope you can hear me now.
Yes.
Good, thank you. I don't know, it must have been my speakers. Well, time is up, it's 5 o'clock. There have been no questions in the Telegram channel and we don't have time. But as explained in the beginning, this is the beginning of a research process of rendering and we encourage you to continue writing in the pad if you so wish. Thank you to all the presenters. Thank you to the audience for sticking to the end, and thank you to Transmediale and Serviu who have helped us today, and also to Varia for hosting the pad. The next steps is for this group of researchers to meet with in person in Brussels later this spring, and to work towards a print publication and also the publication of an online journal, APRJA. If you follow Transmediale, we will make sure that it's available, that the link is available for you. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the festival.
Thank you.